Next up, let's talk about this issue that I think combines a couple of things. It's about access to cell phones. It's about, the whole world that we live in that is so much digital. But it's also about many in our country not being able to sustain themselves, to come from families where they are sustained, where they're neglected, and things of that nature. And then I do suspect just absolute pure childishness, but also child abuse that happens all together. So, according to civil society organizations and the Department of Social Development, children as young as 13 are posing as adults online. They're meeting strangers and they're ending up in dangerous and exploitative situations. It's a deepening trend in South Africa, it seems. And we'll unpack this now with Megan Lessing from the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force, SWET, to explore what's really driving this phenomenon, what families should be doing and policies should be doing, and how society can better respond. Megan, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Usually we hear about transactional sex and people posing as, what they're not online from adults. Adults are doing that to lure in children. So tell me what this new report shows about minors and what may be happening now. Megan?
Sorry, Pabi, I just lost you. Can you just repeat the last section?
No problem at all. First of all, welcome. Take a deep breath. We're all good. I just want to paint a picture of what we've always been told. The picture has always been that there's some older man in his basement and he's pretending to be a child so that he can lure in children, right? Or we think about transactional sex from the person who has the means and then can somehow coerce the young person. But I want to know from this report, right? It's quoted saying that minors are engaging in transactional sex, that minors are posing as adults online. So can you tell us the full story here and how widespread and serious this issue is?
Yeah, so when Sweet was first approached with this, we kind of confirmed that, we don't have statistics of how widespread or specifically documented and this trend across all areas, but we do take, because I think this was based on a community report or someone on the front lines. We do take those very, very seriously because it's people who operate in the communities, who work with teens and young ones. So and it concerns about young people, particularly when it comes from, and I think this referenced a specific area in Cape Town, when it comes from an under-resourced area. It's every detail, even if there's not detailed evidence, it often reflects broader challenges that we do see. It is poverty, lack of opportunity. Often these minors, and we have to be very clear that these are people under the age of 18, they lack opportunity, and this is not safe and youth-friendly services. So these are the conditions that increase vulnerability, especially for those navigating digital spaces without the proper support or the proper protection.
And I think that is what it is, right? The proper support and the proper protection. What do you think those are? Social media is a platform for many, many types of exploitation. So what do we put in place as community members again, but also, from policy makers to make sure that young people are properly protected?
I think that if a child or a teen is being sexually exploited, whether in person or online, the caregivers should prioritize safety and well-being. We've seen in the media sometimes what happens if these cases get broadcasted. There's also always a lot of shaming that these minors experience. It's almost like secondary abuse. And we are very clear that a minor who's
Megan, we're really struggling with this line.
Whoever is the authority figure when a crime has taken place, and we have to be clear that this is a crime, it means that the response should be with empathy. It should be professional support. And that judgment and shame often put these people in more harm than is. I've seen, reports where people want to put so much accountability and responsibility on a child rather on the perpetrator or the adult in the situation. So that is important to, whatever the intervention is, it is done with empathy. It is done with a level of accountability so that, and we often talk about public accountability, so that people can see, if I exploit a child, this is what happens to me. It is public for them.
There are lots of conversations around young people, quote unquote, knowing exactly what they're doing. When it comes to minors perhaps posing as adults or trying to seduce adults in one way or another. And I know that it is exploitation, that is child abuse, that is not, in fact, what has been trying to explain. So you mentioned in your comments that when minors engage in transactional sex, that is not sex work. It's exploitation. No. Can you tell us the distinction and why it's so important?
I think, people engaging, whether you're a young adult, engaging in consensual sex work, support is also needed, especially, we're talking about technology, and technology is not stagnant. It's shifting, it's moving. And I also think we don't talk enough, and maybe we don't have enough expertise on that, on the safeguards in terms of how people navigate digital spaces. I think when you are a minor or you're a young adult, often you don't understand the long-term consequences of that level of exposure or the impact on your life. And for either people who are young adults, but they are legally consenting, that is also an area of education that needs to be explored. I think, we can't talk really about the social media platforms in itself without talking about how the safeguarding protections that should be there is often not there because, it's capitalistic and there's lots of money to be made, not by the people, but, by those running these sites.
Yes.
But, so I think that it's difficult. Support should always be there for people navigating a space where they don't know, and you don't always know the pitfalls of where you can be exploited, whether you do this consensually or whether you are a victim of a crime. Because often the consequences is almost always on the victim, and less on the perpetrator who remains.
Sure. This line is really quite embarrassing because she does come back after a while. So do we wait or do we try and phone her back on a better line? I'm going to make the decision to try and phone her back on a better line. Alex, if you could please do that for us so that we get Rianet on the line with us. This is a frightening trend. And yesterday we were talking about AI being used to create revenge porn, and that's the way that children are now bullying each other. And of course, if that's the way that kids are bullying each other, it means that this AI or social media is the new place to live. That is the new world, right? So we're not living here, you and I, in our flesh and blood. We are living in the cloud. And so the kids are living in the cloud. So that's how they'll bully. And then, there was a time where young girls would go to clubs and this and that and be exploited by men who knew exactly what they were doing. And that again was flesh and blood, but now it's in the cloud. So it's quite a frightening thing. I'd love to know from you if you found on your daughter or your son's cell phone something that is so disturbing that you either had to speak to the school or go to the police because of what you've seen? I'd love to hear your story and how you were able to then protect your child, have a conversation with your child, and move on thereafter. Okay, Megan is back on the line with us. Thank you very much, Megan, and thanks for your patience. I don't know what's going on with these lines today. So let's talk a little bit about the idea that many people involved come from poverty and under-resourced areas. So can you speak to the broader system failures that lead to this kind of risk for people as young as 13?
Yeah, we've all been teens, and I think it sort of comes with the age range that we're talking about. That there's not a lot of forethought when teens make decisions, and coupled with if you have a fuller life where you kind of see where your future is going, and it's very difficult for us to expect teens to, especially if you're struggling with the lack of with poverty and access. And let's also be honest, if this is transactional, it's for money,
Yes.
it's for resources.
Yes.
So, I mean, that is the motivating force. And then it's sort of an indictment on us as a community that a teen has to take on the responsibility, to make money. Often we don't talk enough to people who do this to know that often you'll find that people do it for money, for their basic needs.
And absolutely that occurs, particularly at that kind of age. I think you've seen a lot if you've lived in that kind of environment.
For basic needs. And that is painful, and it is actually an indictment on us as a community, that those are children and their basic needs should be provided for, whether from their parents, from the community, from a government that identifies and supports. And that is important that we acknowledge that it is a failure from us as a community that teens have to, or children have to, go out and make money and find at-risk areas of making money.
So that's what I was saying. If you've grown up maybe in a child-headed household, if you've grown up watching how people are able to meet their basic needs around you, I don't think it's farly flung in terms of imagination that you'd probably want to do something similar. Megan, please can you tell us how we can support Sweat? And, all over the country, do you have social media? Let us know how we can support what work you do.
Yeah, so we already talked about, and we often talk about the survival sex work, or whether people do it on, choice and autonomy. It doesn't really matter how you do it. We've talked about the importance of support along those choices. If you are, like I said, if you are a teen, a minor, then, the interventions are very, very clear. We need to help young teens and minors we need to demand better digital safety and education in schools. We have to also advocate for systemic changes that reduces poverty and increases access to opportunities. If you are a young adult doing sex work, but you're an adult and it is with consent, then you have resources such as Switch, who support all consensual adult sex work across all platforms, And from our perspective, we are also at the same, no shaming, no stigma, and also the importance for policy support, which is the decriminalization of adult and consensual sex work.
Well, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That is Megan Lessing from the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force Sweat, to make sure that it is known, yes, and also there is a task force making sure that it is eradicated, the sexual exploitation of very, very young children, as young as 13, posing as adults online, and their may come from under-resourced areas. Maybe they've lived in neglect for years and years, and this is one of the only ways they find to meet strangers, but they end up in dangerous and exploitative situations. And to the last point that Megan made there, if you are a sex worker and you are a young adult, you could even be 19, right? But you are over the age of consent. That is a very, very different place, because you've made a choice. You are an adult in the law of South Africa, to what's happening with these children as young as 13. Thank you very much, Megan.